The dust never settled in Red Creek territory. It hung in the air like unfinished business, coating everything. The false front buildings, the hitching posts, the worn boots of men who'd learned to sleep with one eye open. The town wasn't much to look at. A crooked main street, a saloon that smelled of spilled whiskey and broken promises, a general store where the owner kept a shotgun under the counter, and a marshal's office with bars on the windows that had seen more prisoners escape than hang. Elias Crowe had been riding for 3 days straight when Red Creek finally appeared on the horizon. His horse was tired, his back ached, his canteen was nearly empty, but none of that mattered. He'd been sent by the territorial governor himself with orders that were simple and impossible: bring law to a place that had forgotten what law meant. The telegram had been brief: outlaw activity escalating, local law insufficient, send your best man. Elias wasn't sure he was the best man, but he was the one who never quit. He rode into town just before noon when the sun turned the dirt into something close to fire. A few faces appeared in windows, then disappeared just as quickly. Word traveled fast in towns like this. A stranger wearing a badge was either salvation or a death sentence, and nobody wanted to bet wrong. Elias dismounted in front of the marshal's office and tied his horse to the post. The door was unlocked. Inside, he found a man slumped in a chair behind a desk, covered in old wanted posters and coffee stains. The man looked up slowly, his eyes bloodshot and his jaw unshaven. "You the deputy marshal?" the man asked. "Elias Crowe." Figured. The man stood, extending a hand that shook slightly. "Tom Birch, town marshal, or what's left of one." Elias shook his hand and set his saddlebag on the desk. "Tell me what I'm walking into." Tom laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You're walking into hell, friend, but it's got a pretty face." He pulled a wanted poster from the stack and slid it across the desk. Two faces stared back at Elias. The man was dark-haired, heavy-browed, with eyes that looked like they'd seen violence and liked it. The woman was striking, sharp cheekbones, pale eyes, hair pulled back tight, but it was her expression that caught Elias's attention. She wasn't scowling or defiant. She was calm, almost serene. "Ronan and Lena Voss," Tom said. "Husband and wife. Been running this territory like it's their own kingdom for near 2 years now." Elias studied the poster. "What's their operation?" "Robbery, rustling, bribery, intimidation. You name it, they've done it. Ronan's the muscle, mean as a rattlesnake and twice as quick. But Lena?" Tom tapped her face on the poster. "She's the brains. Every job they pull, every witness that disappears, every jury that can't seem to remember what they saw. That's her work." "They working alone?" "Got a crew. Maybe 6 or 7 men, depends on the job. But the Vosses are the top. Ronan keeps the boys loyal through fear. Lena keeps the town quiet through other means." "What other means?" Tom looked uncomfortable. "She's got a way about her. Talks to the right people. Knows who's desperate, who's greedy, who's scared. She'll buy you off if she can. Threaten you if she can't. And if neither works," he trailed off, "Ronan steps in." "Ronan steps in." Elias folded the poster and tucked it into his coat. "Where do they operate out of?" "Got a place about 5 miles north of town. Old ranch. Belonged to Lena's first husband before he died. Some say natural causes. Some say Ronan helped things along. Either way, she inherited the property, and now it's their fortress." "And the local law?" Tom's face darkened. "We've tried. Sheriff in the next county tried to serve a warrant on Ronan last year. Found him 2 weeks later in a ravine with a bullet in his back. No witnesses, no evidence. Case went cold." "And you?" "I'm still breathing, if that's what you're asking. But I got a wife and 2 kids, Crow. I do what I can without getting them killed." Elias didn't blame him. Fear was honest. It kept men alive. "I'll need everything you've got," Elias said. "Witness statements, reports, anything that ties them to a crime." Tom opened a drawer and pulled out a thin folder. "It's not much. Most folks won't talk. The ones who do, well, they tend to forget things when it comes time for court." Elias opened the folder. Inside were 6 statements, all of them vague, none of them useful. Suspected theft, possible intimidation, alleged involvement, the language of men too scared to commit. "There's one more thing," Tom said quietly. "Lena's pregnant." Elias looked up. "How far along?" 4, maybe 5 months. She's been real careful not to show it, but word gets around." Elias closed the folder. A pregnant woman complicated everything. The law didn't care, but juries did. Judges did. Public opinion did. "Doesn't change what they've done," Elias said. "No," Tom agreed, "but it changes how folks will see it." Brusson. Elias spent the rest of the day walking the town, listening, watching. He didn't ask questions. Questions made people nervous. He just moved through the streets like a man passing through, his badge visible but not aggressive. He stopped in the general store and bought tobacco he didn't need. The shopkeeper was a wiry man with nervous hands. "You settling in Red Creek, Marshal?" the man asked. "Just passing through." "Good. Town's got enough trouble without more lawmen stirring things up." Elias paid for the tobacco and left. At the saloon, he ordered whiskey and sat in the corner where he could see the door. The bartender was a thick-necked man with scars on his knuckles. "You're the deputy they sent," the bartender said. It wasn't a question. "I am." "Waste of time." "Maybe." The bartender leaned in, his voice low. "You go after the Vosses, you're gonna die. Simple as that." "Appreciate the concern." "It ain't concern, it's fact. Ronan Voss has killed 4 men that I know of, probably more that I don't. And Lena? She's worse. She'll smile at you, pour you a drink, and have you buried before you realize you've been played." Elias sipped his whiskey. "Sounds like someone worth stopping." The bartender straightened. "Your funeral." That night, Elias sat in his rented room above the saloon and went through the reports again. He'd spent years tracking men who thought they were untouchable. Rich men, violent men, connected men. But Ronan and Lena Voss were different. They weren't hiding. They were operating in plain sight, protected not by walls or distance, but by fear and influence. He'd need to separate them. Ronan was dangerous but predictable. Violence always was. Lena was the real threat. She controlled the narrative, the witnesses, the town itself. If he wanted to bring them down, he'd need to outthink her, and that meant learning everything. The next morning, Elias rode out to the Voss ranch. He didn't go alone. He brought Tom Birch and 2 deputies from a neighboring county, both of them armed and wary. The ranch sat in a shallow valley, surrounded by scrub and red rock. It was larger than Elias expected. 2 buildings, a barn, corrals with horses, and a main house with a wide porch. Smoke rose from the chimney. Dogs barked as they approached. A man stepped out of the barn, rifle in hand. He was lean, sun-darkened, with a face that had seen too many fights. "State your business," the man called. Elias reined in his horse. "Deputy Marshal Elias Crowe. I'm here to see Ronan and Lena Voss." "They expecting you?" "No." "Then turn around." Elias didn't move. "I've got questions about some missing cattle. Figured I'd ask polite before things get official." The man's eyes narrowed. "Wait here." He disappeared into the house. A few minutes later, the door opened again, and Lena Voss stepped onto the porch. She was exactly as the poster had shown her, pale-eyed, sharp-featured, composed. She wore a simple dress, dark blue, and her hair was pinned up neatly. If she was 5 months pregnant, it didn't show. She looked like a woman who'd spent the morning reading, not running an outlaw empire. "Deputy Crowe," she said, her voice smooth and clear. "What brings you all the way out here?" Elias dismounted. "Missing livestock. Thought you might have seen something." "Missing from where?" "Davis Ranch. 6 head of cattle. Disappeared 2 weeks ago." Lena smiled faintly. "And you think we stole them?" "I think I'm asking everyone in the area." "How thorough of you." She folded her arms, her gaze steady. "We haven't seen any stray cattle, Marshal, but if we do, I'll be sure to let you know." "Appreciate it. Is there anything else?" Elias glanced past her toward the house. "Is your husband home?" "He's working, but I'll pass along your regards." "I'd prefer to speak to him myself." Lena's smile didn't waver, but something shifted in her eyes. "I'm sure you would, but Ronan doesn't take kindly to strangers showing up unannounced, and I'd hate for there to be any Misunderstandings. It was a warning, polite, clear. Elias tipped his hat. I'll come back another time then. You do that. He mounted his horse and turned back toward town, Tom and the deputies following. As they rode away, Elias glanced back once. Lena was still standing on the porch, watching them. She didn't move, didn't wave, just watched. Tom rode up beside him. She's cold, ain't she? She's smart, Elias said. That's worse, upset. Over the next 2 weeks, Elias worked quietly. He didn't make arrests, didn't draw attention. He just listened. He learned the names of the men who rode with Ronan. He tracked the pattern of robberies. Always remote, always clean, always just outside the jurisdiction of any one lawman. He interviewed witnesses who wouldn't talk on record but whispered over drinks. And slowly, a picture emerged. Ronan Voss was a brute, but he wasn't stupid. He picked his targets carefully. Travelers, small ranches, traders passing through. He moved fast, hit hard, and disappeared before anyone could organize a response. But every job had Lena's fingerprints on it. She scouted, she planned, she made sure there were no loose ends. One night, Elias found a witness who'd actually seen one of the robberies. A traveling merchant named Harris who'd been held up on the northern road 3 months earlier. Harris had lost $200 and a wagon full of goods. He'd reported it to the local marshal, but nothing had come of it. They wore masks, Harris said, his voice shaking, but I knew it was them. Everyone knows. Did you see Lena Voss? She wasn't there, but the man who took my money? He mentioned her, said, the lady sends her regards. Like it was all a joke. Why didn't you testify? Harris looked at Elias like he was insane. Because the last man who testified against the Vosses ended up with his house burned down and his daughter run out of town. You think I'm stupid? Elias didn't answer. Fear wasn't stupid. It was survival. Okay. 3 weeks in, Elias made his move. He tracked Ronan to a cattle auction in a town called Black Ridge, 40 miles south of Red Creek. Ronan was there with 2 of his men, buying stock with money that probably wasn't his. Elias waited until Ronan was alone, walking back to his horse after the auction ended. Ronan Voss. Ronan turned, his hand already moving toward his gun, but Elias was faster. His revolver was out and leveled before Ronan's fingers touched leather. Don't, Elias said quietly. Ronan froze. His eyes were dark, feral. You're that deputy. I am. You got a warrant? I do. Elias pulled a folded paper from his coat. Cattle rustling, robbery, intimidation. Take your pick. Ronan's jaw tightened. You're making a mistake. Maybe, but you're coming with me. For a moment it looked like Ronan might try it. His hand twitched, his body coiled, but then he saw the 2 deputies behind Elias, both armed, both ready. Slowly, Ronan raised his hands. They cuffed him and put him on a horse. The ride back to Red Creek was silent. Ronan didn't beg, didn't threaten. He just stared at Elias with the cold hatred of a man who knew this wasn't over. News of Ronan's arrest spread through Red Creek like wildfire. By the time Elias brought him into town, a crowd had gathered. Some looked relieved, others looked terrified. Tom Birch met them at the marshal's office. You actually got him. I did. What about Lena? She's next. Tom shook his head. She won't come quiet. She won't have a choice. They locked Ronan in a cell, and Elias immediately sent word to the territorial court. He wanted this done fast, before Lena had time to work her magic, but he'd underestimated her. The next morning, Lena Voss walked into the marshal's office alone, dressed in black, her hair loose around her shoulders. She looked like a widow already. I'd like to see my husband, she said calmly. Elias stood. That's not a good idea. I'm not asking for permission, Marshal. I'm asking for decency. Tom shifted uncomfortably. Let her see him, Crowe. Won't hurt nothing. Elias hesitated, then nodded. 5 minutes. Lena walked past him to the cell. Ronan was sitting on the cot, his hands clenched into fists. When he saw her, his expression softened, just for a moment. Lena. I'm working on it, she said quietly. Don't bother. He's got nothing. He's got you. Ronan's face darkened. Then get me out. I will. Elias stepped forward. Time's up. Lena didn't argue. She turned and walked out without looking back. The trial was set for 2 weeks later. Elias spent every day building his case, gathering statements, tracking down evidence. But every time he thought he had something solid, it slipped away. Witnesses changed their stories. Documents went missing. One man who'd agreed to testify left town in the middle of the night. And through it all, Lena Voss moved through Red Creek like a ghost, visiting homes, talking to shopkeepers, sitting in the saloon with a glass of wine and a quiet smile. By the time the trial began, Elias knew he was in trouble. The courtroom was packed. Ronan sat at the defendant's table, stone-faced. Lena sat in the front row, her hands folded in her lap, her expression serene. The prosecutor was a young man named Dalton, sent from the territorial capital. He laid out the charges: robbery, rustling, intimidation. He called witnesses. He presented evidence. But every time a witness took the stand, their testimony fell apart. "I thought it was him, but I can't be sure. It was dark. Could have been anyone. I may have been mistaken." Elias watched from the back of the room, his jaw tight. Lena never looked at the witnesses. She didn't have to. They knew what would happen if they told the truth. The defense attorney was a slick man from Denver, expensive and experienced. He tore apart every piece of evidence, cast doubt on every witness, and painted Ronan as a hardworking rancher being persecuted by an overreaching lawman. When it was over, the jury deliberated for less than an hour. Guilty, but only on minor charges. Ronan was sentenced to 18 months in the territorial prison. Lena Voss walked free. Elias stood outside the courthouse as the crowd dispersed, his hands shaking with frustration. Tom Birch came up beside him. "She beat you," Tom said quietly. "She did. What now?" Elias looked toward the horizon where the sun was setting over the red rocks. "Now I wait. Ronan's in prison. Lena's pregnant. Things'll change." "You sure about that?" Elias wasn't sure of anything anymore. But he knew one thing: this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The prison wagon left Red Creek at dawn, carrying Ronan Voss toward 18 months of stone walls and iron bars. Elias watched it disappear into the early morning haze, the dust settling slowly behind the wheels. He'd won something, but it felt hollow. Ronan was locked up, yes, but Lena was still free, still dangerous, still pulling strings he couldn't see. Tom Birch stood beside him, squinting against the rising sun. "Think she'll stay quiet while he's gone?" "No," Elias said. "But I think she'll be smart about it." He was right. For the first month after Ronan's imprisonment, Lena Voss seemed to vanish from public life. She stayed at the ranch, rarely coming into town. When she did appear, it was only for necessities: supplies from the general store, a visit to the bank, a quiet meal at the hotel restaurant. She spoke politely to everyone, paid her bills on time, and never once mentioned her husband's conviction. But Elias knew better than to mistake silence for surrender. He kept watching. He tracked the movements of Ronan's old crew, the men who'd ridden with him on raids and robberies. Most of them had scattered after the trial, drifting to other territories or lying low in remote camps. But two of them, a pair of brothers named Wade and Curtis Brennan, still visited the Voss ranch regularly. They came at odd hours, stayed for a few hours, then left under cover of darkness. Elias mentioned it to Tom one afternoon while they sat in the marshal's office, reviewing reports. "The Brennans are still working for her," Elias said. Tom looked up from his paperwork. "Doing what?" "That's what I need to find out." "You planning to ride out there again?" "Not yet. She's expecting that. I'll wait until she gets comfortable." Tom leaned back in his chair, rubbing his eyes. "You're playing a long game, Crowe. Hope you got the patience for it." Elias did. Patience was the only advantage he had. 2 weeks later, a ranch hand from the Davis property came into town with a complaint. More cattle had gone missing, 8 head this time, disappeared overnight without a trace. The hand was young, maybe 20, with sunburned skin and nervous hands. "Same as before," the hand said. "No tracks, no noise, just gone." Elias took down the details, then asked the question he already knew the answer to. "You think it was the Vosses?" The hand hesitated. "I ain't saying nothing about the Vosses." "Then who are you saying it about?" "I'm saying cattle don't disappear on their own, Marshal. Someone's taking them, and whoever it is knows what they're doing." Elias thanked him and sent him on his way. Then he pulled out a map of the territory and marked the location of the Davis Ranch. It was the third property in as many months to report missing livestock, and all three were within a 10-mile radius of the Voss place. He showed the map to Tom. She's still running the operation. Tom studied the markings. Could be someone else, could be drifters. It's not drifters, it's organized, professional. Then prove it. That was the problem. Proving anything against Lena Voss was like trying to catch smoke. She never left fingerprints, never made mistakes, and the people who worked for her were too loyal or too scared to talk. Elias decided to change tactics. Instead of going after Lena directly, he'd go after the men around her. If he could break the Brennan brothers, he might finally get the evidence he needed. He spent a week tracking their movements, learning their routines. Wade was the older one, cautious and methodical. Curtis was younger, brasher, prone to drinking too much and talking too loud. If either of them had a weak point, it was Curtis. Elias found him one night in the saloon, 3 whiskeys deep and holding court with a table of locals. Curtis was telling a story about a horse he'd won in a card game, exaggerating every detail with wide gestures and loud laughter. Elias waited until Curtis got up to use the outhouse, then followed him outside. The night was cool, the moon hidden behind clouds. Curtis was leaning against the back wall of the saloon, relieving himself when Elias stepped into view. Curtis Brennan. Curtis jumped, fumbling to button his pants. Jesus, you scared me. Deputy Marshal Crowe, I need to talk to you. Curtis's expression shifted from surprise to wariness. About what? About the cattle that keep disappearing around here. I don't know nothing about that. I think you do? Curtis straightened, his hand drifting toward his belt. You accusing me of something? Elias kept his voice calm, his stance relaxed. I'm asking questions. You can answer them here, friendly-like, or we can do this at the marshal's office. Curtis spat into the dirt. I got nothing to say to you. Then maybe your brother does. That got a reaction. Curtis's jaw tightened. Leave Wade out of this. Can't do that. You two are working for Lena Voss, and she's running the same operation Ronan used to run. Only now she's doing it without him. You're full of it. Am I? Elias stepped closer. Because I've been watching, Curtis. I know you visit the ranch. I know you ride out at night. I know you come back with money in your pockets and new boots on your feet. So either you're rustling cattle on your own, or you're doing it for her. Curtis's face flushed with anger. You don't know nothing. Then help me understand. For a moment it looked like Curtis might crack. His eyes darted toward the saloon, then back to Elias. His hands clenched and unclenched. But then the door to the saloon opened, and Wade Brennan stepped out. Wade was taller than his brother, leaner, with a face that gave nothing away. He looked at Elias, then at Curtis. What's going on? Marshal here thinks we're rustlers, Curtis said. Wade's expression didn't change. That's so. I'm investigating missing livestock, Elias said. Your names keep coming up. Names come up all the time, Wade said. Doesn't mean much. It does when there's a pattern. Wade smiled faintly. You got proof, Marshal, you bring it. Otherwise, you're wasting our time. He put a hand on Curtis's shoulder and steered him back toward the saloon. Curtis looked back once, his face a mix of anger and fear, but he didn't say anything. Elias stood alone in the darkness, frustration gnawing at him. Wade was too smart to slip. Curtis was too scared, and Lena was still pulling the strings. The next morning, Elias received a visitor at the marshal's office. It was a woman he didn't recognize, middle-aged, dressed plainly, with tired eyes and calloused hands. She introduced herself as Margaret Hayes, wife of a homesteader who lived north of Red Creek. My husband told me not to come, she said quietly, but I can't keep silent anymore. Elias gestured for her to sit. What do you need to tell me? Margaret twisted her hands in her lap. 3 weeks ago, 2 men came to our property. They said they were looking for stray horses. My husband told them we hadn't seen any, and they left. But the next night, 4 of our horses were gone. Did you report it? To who? The local marshal doesn't care. He says it's just bad luck. Did you recognize the men? Margaret hesitated. One of them was Curtis Brennan. I've seen him in town before. The other one I didn't know. Elias leaned forward. Are you willing to testify to that? I don't know. My husband says it's too dangerous. He says people who cross the Vosses end up She stopped, her voice breaking. End up what? Dead. Or worse. Elias kept his voice gentle. Mrs. Hayes, I can't protect you if you don't help me. But if you testify, I'll do everything I can to keep you safe. Margaret looked at him with eyes full of doubt. You say that now, but you're not the one who has to sleep in that house at night, wondering if they'll come back. She stood, wrapping her shawl tighter around her shoulders. I shouldn't have come. Wait. But she was already gone. Elias sat at his desk, staring at the empty doorway. He was losing ground. Every witness he found was too scared to talk. Every piece of evidence was too weak to hold up in court. And Lena Voss was still out there, untouchable. He needed a new approach. That afternoon, he rode out to the territorial prison where Ronan was being held. The prison was a grim place, a compound of low stone buildings surrounded by high walls and guard towers. The air smelled of dust and sweat and despair. Elias met with the warden, a barrel-chested man named Dockery, who'd spent 20 years managing violent men. What do you want with Voss? Dockery asked. Information. Good luck. He doesn't talk much. Does he get visitors? His wife came once, about 2 weeks after he arrived. Brought him books and a letter. We checked everything, nothing suspicious. What about mail? Gets letters every week, all from her. We read them. Nothing incriminating. Elias wasn't surprised. Lena was too smart to put anything useful in writing. Dockery led him through the compound to a visitation room, a small, windowless space with a table and 2 chairs. A guard brought Ronan in a few minutes later. Ronan looked thinner than Elias remembered, his face harder, his eyes colder. He sat down without speaking, his wrists shackled. Elias sat across from him. How's prison treating you? Ronan's lip curled. What do you want, Crowe? I want to know what your wife's doing. She's minding her own business. You should try it. Cattle keep disappearing. Witnesses keep going silent. Feels like old times. Ronan leaned back in his chair. Maybe you're just bad at your job. Maybe. Or maybe Lena's running the same operation you used to run, only now she's doing it without you. For the first time, something flickered in Ronan's eyes. Anger, pride. Lena doesn't need me. That what she tells you in her letters? Ronan's jaw tightened. You don't know nothing about her. I know she's smart. Smarter than you, probably. And I know she's keeping your crew together while you rot in here. She's keeping things together because that's what she does. She's strong. She's a criminal, Ronan laughed bitterly. And you're a lawman. Doesn't mean you're any better. Elias leaned forward. Here's what I think, Ronan. I think you're proud of her, proud that she's holding the operation together. But I also think it eats at you, knowing she's out there doing it without you, knowing the Brennans are taking orders from her now, not you. Ronan's expression darkened. Get out. You could help me stop her. Give me something I can use, and I'll make sure you get credit for cooperating. I said get out. Elias stood. Suit yourself, but when I bring her down, and I will, you'll still be in here. And she'll be the one who walked into a cell because you weren't there to protect her. He walked to the door and knocked for the guard. As he left, he glanced back. Ronan was staring at the table, his hands clenched into fists, his face twisted with rage. The seed was planted. Now Elias just had to wait. The break came 3 weeks later in a way Elias didn't expect. A young woman named Sarah Finch came to the marshal's office one afternoon, nervous and pale. She worked as a maid at the Voss ranch, hired by Lena just after Ronan went to prison. I need to talk to you, Sarah said quietly. Elias led her inside and closed the door. What's this about? Sarah glanced around as if afraid someone might be listening. Mrs. Voss, she's planning something. What kind of something? I don't know exactly, but last night the Brennan brothers came to the house. They were arguing with her in the study. I heard them through the door. What were they arguing about? Curtis wanted to hit a ranch near the border. He said it was easy money, but Mrs. Voss said it was too risky. She told him to wait. Wait for what? I don't know, but Wade said something about a shipment coming through next month. Mrs. Voss got real quiet after that. Then she told them to leave. Elias's mind raced. A shipment. That could mean anything. Gold, cash, supplies. But if Lena was planning to hit it, she'd need men, planning, and perfect timing. Why are you telling me this? Elias asked. Sarah's eyes filled with tears. Because I'm scared. Mrs. Voss has been good to me, but the things I've heard, the people who come to that house, I don't want to be part of it. And I don't want to end up like the last girl who worked there. What happened to her? She asked too many questions. One day she was there, the next day she wasn't. Mrs. Voss said she went back east, but I found her apron in the burn pile. Elias felt a chill run through him. Are you willing to testify? Not in court, but I'll tell you what I know, as long as you keep my name out of it. I'll do my best. Over the next hour, Sarah told him everything. The names of the men who visited the ranch, the times they came, the whispered conversations she'd overheard. She didn't have proof, but she had details. And details were enough to start building a case. When she left, Elias sat at his desk and began mapping out Lena's operation. It was bigger than he'd thought. She wasn't just rustling cattle. She was running protection rackets, taking cuts from illegal gambling, and fencing stolen goods through contacts in other territories. Ronan had built the foundation, but Lena had turned it into an empire. And she'd done it all while pregnant, all while maintaining the image of a respectable widow waiting for her husband's return. Elias knew he couldn't take her down alone. He needed help. He sent a telegram to the territorial governor requesting additional deputies and authority to make arrests across county lines. The response came 2 days later. Request approved. 2 deputies would arrive within the week. But Elias didn't wait. He couldn't afford to. Using Sarah's information, he tracked the Brennan brothers to a line shack 20 miles west of Red Creek. They were holed up there with 2 other men, waiting for word from Lena about the shipment. Elias took Tom Birch and 3 armed men from town, volunteers who were tired of living in fear. They rode out at dusk, timing their arrival for just after dark. The shack was small, half hidden by scrub and rock. Lamplight flickered in the windows. Elias positioned his men around the perimeter, then approached the door alone. He knocked once. Curtis Brennan. Wade Brennan. This is Deputy Marshal Crowe. Come out with your hands up. Silence. Then a gunshot shattered the window, the bullet whizzing past Elias's head. He dove for cover as more shots rang out. His men returned fire, the night exploding with noise and muzzle flashes. Elias worked his way around the side of the shack, staying low. He could hear shouting inside, Wade's voice, calm and commanding, telling Curtis to shut up and keep shooting. Elias kicked in the back door and went in fast. Wade was by the front window, rifle raised. Curtis was reloading a pistol, his hand shaking. The other 2 men were crouched near the fireplace. Drop your weapons. Wade spun, bringing the rifle around. Elias fired first. The shot hit Wade in the shoulder, spinning him back against the wall. The rifle clattered to the floor. Curtis raised his pistol, but Tom burst through the front door, shotgun leveled. Don't even think about it. Curtis froze, then slowly set the pistol down. The other 2 men surrendered without a fight. Elias cuffed Wade, who was bleeding but alive. You're under arrest for cattle rustling, armed robbery, and attempted murder of a lawman. Wade glared at him through gritted teeth. You got nothing. I've got witnesses, I've got testimony, and I've got you holding a smoking gun. Curtis looked like he might be sick. Wade, maybe we should... Shut up, Wade snapped. But it was too late. Curtis was cracking. By the time they got the Brennans back to Red Creek and locked them in cells, Curtis was ready to talk. He sat in the interrogation room, hands trembling, eyes red-rimmed. She's going to kill me, he muttered. Who? Elias asked, though he already knew. Mrs. Voss. She finds out I talked, she'll kill me. She can't hurt you if she's in prison. Curtis laughed bitterly. You don't know her. She's got people everywhere, even in here probably. Then help me put her away for good. Tell me everything. Curtis looked at him for a long moment, fear and desperation warring on his face. Then he started talking. He told Elias about the rustling operation, how Lena planned every job, scouted every target, arranged every sale. He told him about the protection money she collected from businesses in Red Creek and 3 other towns. He told him about the hired men she brought in from other territories, men with no loyalty except to cash. And he told him about the shipment, a gold transport coming through the territory next month, carrying payment for a mining operation in Colorado. Lena had been planning to hit it for weeks, coordinating with contacts along the route. How much gold? Elias asked. Enough to set her up for life, enough to disappear if she wanted. Elias wrote it all down, every word. When Curtis finally finished, he looked exhausted. "What happens to me now?" Curtis asked. "You testify, you might get a lighter sentence. You don't. You hang alongside your brother." Curtis closed his eyes. "I'll testify." The next morning, Elias rode out to the Voss ranch one last time. He brought 4 deputies, all of them armed and ready. He had a warrant signed by a territorial judge charging Lena Voss with conspiracy to commit robbery, cattle rustling, extortion, and half a dozen other crimes. The ranch was quiet when they arrived. No dogs barking, no men in the yard, just smoke rising from the chimney and curtains drawn over the windows. Elias dismounted and walked to the front door. He knocked. Lena opened it herself. She was wearing a dark green dress, her hair pinned up, her expression calm. She looked at the deputies, then at Elias. "Marshal Crowe," she said, "what can I do for you?" "Lena Voss, you're under arrest." She didn't flinch, didn't protest. She just looked at him with those pale, unreadable eyes. "May I ask what for?" "Everything," Elias said. "Rustling, extortion, conspiracy. Take your pick." She smiled faintly. "You'll need proof." "I've got testimony from Curtis Brennan. He's telling us everything." For the first time, something flickered across her face. Not fear, not anger, disappointment. "Curtis always was weak," she said softly. She stepped out onto the porch and held out her wrists. "I assume you'll want to cuff me?" Elias hesitated, surprised by her composure. Then he cuffed her, gently. As they led her to the wagon, she looked back at the ranch, the house, the barn, the land that had been her kingdom. She didn't cry, didn't struggle. She just climbed into the wagon and sat down, her hands folded in her lap like she was waiting for tea. Tom rode up beside Elias. "Think this'll stick?" "It has to," Elias said. But even as they rode back toward Red Creek, with Lena Voss in custody and Curtis Brennan ready to testify, Elias couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't over. Lena was too smart, too careful. And even in chains, she looked like a woman who still held all the cards. The courtroom was packed tighter than it had been for Ronan's trial. Every seat was filled, people standing in the back, others pressed against the walls. Word had spread through Red Creek, and beyond that, Lena Voss was finally facing justice, and folks wanted to see if the law could actually hold her or if she'd slip through again like water through a sieve. Elias sat in the front row, watching as Lena was led in by 2 guards. She wore a simple gray dress, modest and plain, her hair pulled back in a neat bun. She looked smaller somehow, more fragile, her pregnancy now visible in the curve of her belly. The guards removed her shackles and she sat at the defense table, folding her hands primly in front of her. Her lawyer was the same Denver man who'd defended Ronan, a sharp-dressed serpent named Caldwell, who smiled too much and never blinked. He leaned over and whispered something to Lena. She nodded once, her face serene. The prosecutor, Dalton, looked more prepared this time. He had files stacked on his table, witness lists, evidence logs. Curtis Brennan's testimony had given them what they needed: names, dates, details that couldn't be explained away. The judge entered, a stern-faced man named Harlow, who'd been appointed by the territorial governor specifically because he had a reputation for being incorruptible. He banged his gavel, and the room fell silent. "The territory versus Lena Voss," Judge Harlow announced. "Charges include conspiracy to commit robbery, cattle rustling, extortion, and operating a criminal enterprise." "How does the defendant plead?" Caldwell stood smoothly. "Not guilty, Your Honor." The trial began. Dalton called Curtis Brennan as his first witness. Curtis looked terrible, pale, unshaven, his hand shaking as he was sworn in. He wouldn't look at Lena. He stared at the floor, at the wall, anywhere but the defense table. "Mr. Brennan," Dalton began, "how long did you work for Lena Voss?" "About 8 months," Curtis said quietly. "And what was the nature of that work?" Curtis swallowed hard. "We rustled cattle, stole horses. She'd tell us where to go, what to take. We'd bring it back and she'd arrange the sales." "She personally directed these operations?" "Yes, sir." "Can you give the court an example?" Curtis described a raid on the Hayes homestead, the same one Margaret Hayes had mentioned to Elias. He laid out how Lena had scouted the property herself, noted when the family went to town, calculated how many horses they could take without raising immediate alarm. She'd sent Curtis and another man to do the actual work, then sold the horses through a contact in Wyoming. And Mrs. Voss took a share of the profits? She took half, said it was payment for planning and risk management. Caldwell rose to cross-examine. He moved slowly, like a predator circling wounded prey. Mr. Brennan, isn't it true that you're facing charges of armed assault on a law officer? Yes, sir. And isn't it also true that you were offered a reduced sentence in exchange for your testimony here today? Curtis shifted in his seat. They said they'd consider it. So you have every reason to lie, don't you? To say whatever the prosecution wants in order to save your own skin? I'm not lying. Really? Caldwell smiled. Because it seems awfully convenient that you suddenly remember all these details about Mrs. Voss after you're arrested. Where was your conscience when you were committing these crimes? Curtis's face flushed. I did what I was told. I was scared of her. Scared of a pregnant woman? Scared of what she could do. What she'd have done if I refused. Caldwell laughed softly. Mr. Brennan, you're a grown man with a criminal record. You've been arrested 3 times before this. And you want this court to believe you were intimidated by a woman half your size? She's dangerous. Or perhaps you're simply a criminal looking for someone else to blame. Dalton objected. The judge sustained it. But the damage was done. Caldwell had planted doubt. Sarah Finch testified next, nervous and stammering. She described overhearing conversations at the ranch, seeing the Brennan brothers come and go, finding the burned apron of the maid who'd disappeared. But under cross-examination, she admitted she'd never actually seen Lena commit any crime. Everything was secondhand, whispers, and suspicions. Margaret Hayes refused to testify at all. She'd sent word through her husband that she couldn't risk it, that her family came first. Elias couldn't blame her, but it left another hole in their case. 3 more witnesses followed, ranchers who'd lost livestock, a shopkeeper who'd paid protection money, a former hired hand who'd worked for Lena briefly. Each one told a piece of the story, but each one also had weaknesses that Caldwell exploited ruthlessly. Grudges, debts, reasons to lie. By the end of the second day, Elias could feel the case slipping. They had testimony, but no physical evidence. They had patterns, but no proof. And Lena sat through it all with the patience of a woman watching rainfall, knowing it would eventually stop. On the 3rd day, Caldwell put Lena on the stand. She walked to the witness box slowly, one hand resting on her belly. She was sworn in, sat down, and folded her hands in her lap. She looked directly at the jury. 12 men, all of them ranchers or merchants or tradesmen who'd lived in hard country long enough to respect survival. Mrs. Voss, Caldwell began gently, can you tell the court about your life before you married Ronan Voss? I was married to a rancher named Thomas Hayes, she said, her voice clear and steady. He died of pneumonia 4 years ago, left me the ranch and nothing else. I was alone, struggling to keep the property running. And how did you meet Ronan? He came through looking for work. He was rough around the edges, but he was strong and willing. I hired him. Over time, we grew close. Eventually, we married. Did you know about his criminal activities? Lena looked down, her expression pained. Not at first. By the time I realized what he was doing, I was already tied to him, legally, financially, and I was carrying his child. There were murmurs in the courtroom. Caldwell let them settle before continuing. Mrs. Voss, the prosecution claims you ran a criminal operation while your husband was in prison. Is that true? No, sir. I ran a ranch. I hired men to help with the work. If some of those men were involved in criminal activity, I wasn't aware of it. What about Curtis Brennan's testimony? He claims you directed him to steal livestock. Lena met Caldwell's eyes. Curtis Brennan is a liar and a coward. He worked for me for a short time, yes, but when he started getting into trouble, he came to me asking for money. I refused. Now he's making up stories to save himself. And the protection money the shopkeeper mentioned? I have business arrangements with several merchants in town. They rent space on my property for storage. They pay me rent. That's not extortion. That's commerce. Dalton stood to cross-examine, but Lena was ready for him. Every question he asked, she had an answer. Every accusation she deflected. She was calm, reasonable, sympathetic. A widow trying to survive in a man's world. A pregnant woman being persecuted because of her husband's crimes. Mrs. Voss, Dalton said, his voice tight with frustration. Are you telling this court that you had no knowledge of any criminal activity happening on your property or involving your employees? That's exactly what I'm saying. And the conversation Sarah Finch overheard? Sarah was a nervous girl with an active imagination. I let her go because she was unreliable. Apparently she decided to make up stories out of spite. And the Hayes horses that Curtis Brennan stole? If Curtis stole horses, that's his crime, not mine. I don't control what my employees do on their own time. Dalton paced in front of the witness stand. Mrs. Voss, do you really expect us to believe that all of this is coincidence? That your husband is a convicted criminal, your ranch is the center of illegal activity, your employees are thieves and rustlers, but somehow you're completely innocent? Lena looked at him with those pale, unreadable eyes. I expect you to prove I'm guilty, Mr. Dalton. That's how the law works, isn't it? The jury deliberated for 2 days. Elias spent that time pacing the streets of Red Creek, unable to sleep, unable to eat. He'd put everything into this case. If Lena walked free again, he didn't know what he'd do. Tom found him on the second evening, standing outside the courthouse as the sun set. Jury's coming back, Tom said. They filed into the courtroom with everyone else. Lena was brought in, still wearing that gray dress, still looking calm. The jury took their seats. Judge Harlow asked for the verdict. The foreman stood. On the charge of conspiracy to commit robbery, we find the defendant guilty. Elias felt something release in his chest. On the charge of cattle rustling, we find the defendant guilty. On the charge of extortion, we find the defendant not guilty. On the charge of operating a criminal enterprise, we find the defendant guilty. It wasn't a complete victory, but it was enough. Judge Harlow sentenced Lena to 5 years in the Territorial Women's Prison to be served immediately. She showed no reaction. She simply stood, let the guards put the shackles back on, and walked out of the courtroom with her head high. Elias watched her go, feeling both relief and unease. 5 years wasn't long. Not for what she'd done, but it was something. Ronan heard about Lena's conviction 3 days later. The warden sent word to Elias that Ronan had gone into a rage, smashing furniture in his cell and threatening anyone who came near him. It took 4 guards to restrain him. He keeps screaming that you set her up, Warden Dockery told Elias during a visit. Says he's going to kill you when he gets out. How much longer does he have? 8 months if he behaves, which he won't. We'll probably add time for the damage he's caused. Elias nodded. 8 months. Maybe a year if they were lucky. And then Ronan Voss would be free again, angrier and more dangerous than ever. Lena was transferred to the women's prison in Silver Ridge, 200 miles north. Elias made the trip once, 2 months after her sentencing, just to see how she was adapting. The prison was smaller than Ronan's, cleaner, but no less grim. Lena sat across from him in the visitation room wearing a plain cotton dress, her belly now prominent with the pregnancy. She looked tired but composed. Deputy Crowe, she said, I didn't expect to see you here. Just checking in. How thoughtful. They sat in silence for a moment. Then Elias spoke. Your baby's due soon. 3 months. What happens after? Lena's expression didn't change. The prison has arrangements. The child will go to a family until I'm released. You plan for that? I plan for everything, Marshal. You should know that by now. Elias leaned forward. Why didn't you stop, Lena? You're smart enough to have gone straight. You could have run the ranch legally, made a decent life. She smiled faintly. Decent doesn't pay, Marshal. Decent doesn't protect you when men like my first husband die and leave you with nothing but debt and land you can't work alone. Decent doesn't survive out here. So you became a criminal. I became a survivor. And now you're in prison. For now. She met his eyes. But 5 years isn't forever, and I'm a patient woman. The threat was subtle but clear. Elias stood. Stay patient then, because I'll be watching when you get out. I'm counting on it. Well, Ronan was released 11 months later, his sentence extended for violent behavior and destruction of property. He walked out of prison thinner, harder, his eyes filled with a cold fury that hadn't been there before. Elias heard about it the day it happened. Tom brought him the news while he was eating breakfast at the hotel restaurant. Ronan's out. Elias set down his coffee. When? This morning. Warden sent word. Where'd he go? Don't know, but I'd bet money he's headed back here. Tom was right. Ronan arrived in Red Creek 2 days later, riding a borrowed horse and wearing clothes that hung loose on his frame. He went straight to the ranch, found it mostly empty. Lena's hired hands had scattered after her conviction, and set up camp in the main house. Elias didn't go after him. Not yet. Ronan hadn't committed any new crimes. He was a free man, legally allowed to be there. But Elias watched, and he waited. For the first few weeks, Ronan kept to himself. He worked the ranch alone, fixing fences, tending the few remaining animals. He didn't come into town, didn't cause trouble. But Elias could feel the tension building, like a storm gathering on the horizon. Then the robberies started again. A mail coach was held up on the northern road. 2 men with masks, fast and efficient, taking cash and valuables before disappearing into the rocks. A week later, a trading post was robbed in broad daylight. Same pattern, same execution. Elias knew it was Ronan, but knowing and proving were different things. He rode out to the ranch, taking Tom and 2 deputies with him. Ronan was in the yard, chopping wood, when they arrived. He set down the axe and watched them approach. "Marshal," Ronan said. His voice was rough, like he hadn't used it in days. "Ronan, we need to talk." "About what?" "About the robberies." Ronan smiled without humor. "Don't know what you're talking about." 2 holdups in 2 weeks. Same area where you used to operate. Same methods. Lot of outlaws in these territories, Crowe. Can't blame them all on me. I can when it's this obvious. Ronan picked up the axe again, testing its weight. "You got a warrant?" "Not yet." "Then get off my property." Elias didn't move. "You know Lena's still in prison. You know she's got 3 more years." "I know." "You think robbing coaches is going to help her?" Ronan's jaw tightened. "I think I need money to keep this place running until she gets back. And I think the law took everything else from me, so I'm taking it back." "That's not how it works." "It's how it works for me." Elias studied him. Ronan was different now. Prison had broken something in him, or maybe just revealed what had always been there. He wasn't the same man who'd sat quietly through his trial. He was angrier, reckless, and he didn't care anymore. "You keep going down this road," Elias said quietly. "You won't live long enough to see her get out." Ronan met his eyes. "Then I guess I better make it count." 3 weeks later, Ronan walked into the Red Creek Saloon in the middle of the afternoon with a gun in each hand. The place was half full. Drinkers, card players, a few townspeople having lunch. Ronan fired a shot into the ceiling. "Everyone out, now!" The patrons scrambled for the door. The bartender, the same thick-necked man who'd warned Elias months ago, stood frozen behind the bar. "You too," Ronan said. "Ronan, don't do this." Ronan pointed the gun at his chest. "Out!" The bartender left. Ronan went behind the bar and started filling a sack with cash from the register, bottles of expensive whiskey, anything valuable he could carry. He was halfway through when Sheriff Tom Birch appeared in the doorway, his own gun drawn. "Ronan, put the guns down." Ronan turned slowly. "Go home, Tom. This doesn't concern you." "You're robbing a business in my town. It concerns me." "Your town?" Ronan laughed. "This town belongs to whoever's strong enough to take it. Used to be me and Lena. Then it was you and Crowe. Now it's just me." "It's not yours anymore." "Then come take it from me." Tom's hand was shaking. He was a decent man, a family man, but he wasn't a gunfighter. Ronan saw it. Everyone saw it. "You don't want to do this, Tom," Ronan said, his voice almost gentle. "You got kids, a wife. Go home to them." For a moment, it looked like Tom might lower his gun. Then Ronan shifted his weight, and Tom fired. The shot went wide, hitting the wall behind the bar. Ronan didn't hesitate. He fired twice. Both bullets hit Tom in the chest, knocking him backward onto the street. Ronan walked out of the saloon, stepping over Tom's body without looking down. People were screaming, running. Someone was already kneeling beside Tom, pressing hands against the wounds, but Elias could see from across the street that it was too late. Tom Birch was dead. Ronan mounted his horse and rode out of town at a gallop, heading north toward the open wilderness. By the time Elias reached Tom's body, Ronan was already gone. Elias knelt beside his friend, his hands covered in blood that was already cooling. Tom's eyes were open, staring at nothing. Someone had closed them by the time the undertaker arrived. The town gathered in silence. No one spoke. No one knew what to say. Tom had been a good man, a careful man, and Lena Voss had killed him in broad daylight like it meant nothing. Elias stood slowly, wiping his hands on his coat. His face was stone, but inside something cold and final had settled into place. He didn't go back to the marshal's office. He went to his room, loaded his rifle, checked his revolver, and packed supplies. Then he saddled his horse and rode out alone. He tracked Ronan for 3 days through terrain that got rougher and more remote with every mile. Ronan wasn't trying to hide his trail. He was daring Elias to follow. On the 4th day, Elias found him. They were in a high valley, surrounded by red cliffs and sparse juniper. Ronan's horse was grazing near a creek. Ronan himself was sitting on a rock, cleaning his guns. He looked up as Elias rode into view, and he smiled. "Took you long enough." Elias dismounted, keeping his rifle ready. "You killed a good man, Ronan." "He drew on me. It was self-defense." "It was murder." Ronan stood, holstering one gun and keeping the other loose in his hand. "Call it what you want. He's dead, and soon you will be too. I'm taking you in." "No, you're not." They stood 30 feet apart, the wind moving through the valley, carrying the smell of dust and sage. Elias could see it in Ronan's eyes. The decision had already been made. There would be no surrender, no trial. This ended here. "Don't make me do this," Elias said. Ronan laughed. "You think I'm afraid of dying? I lost everything, Crowe. My wife's in prison because of you. My life's gone. All I got left is this." He gestured with the gun. "So yeah, you're going to have to do it, because I'm not stopping." "Then draw." Ronan's hand moved. Elias was faster. The shot echoed through the valley, sharp and final. Ronan staggered back, his gun falling from his hand, a red stain spreading across his chest. He looked down at it, almost surprised, then looked back at Elias. "She's going to kill you for this," he whispered. Then he fell. Elias stood there for a long time, his rifle still raised, smoke curling from the barrel. Then he lowered it slowly and walked over to Ronan's body. He checked for a pulse, found none, and closed Ronan's eyes. He buried Ronan there in the valley, under a pile of rocks with no marker. Then he rode back to Red Creek with Ronan's guns and the news that the territory's most dangerous outlaw was finally dead. When word reached Lena in prison, she didn't cry, she didn't scream. She just sat in her cell, one hand on her belly where her child grew, and stared at the wall. The warden asked if she wanted to send word to anyone, arrange for the body to be moved. "No," she said quietly. "Leave him where he is." She never spoke Ronan's name again. Lena gave birth to a daughter 3 weeks after Ronan died. The prison doctor delivered the baby in a small room with barred windows, and when the infant cried for the first time, Lena closed her eyes and said nothing. They let her hold the child for 2 hours, just long enough for the baby to nurse once, and then they took her away. The family who'd agreed to take the child was named Morrison, a rancher and his wife from east of Silver Ridge, who'd lost their own daughter to fever the year before. The prison chaplain assured Lena they were good people, that the baby would be safe and cared for until Lena's release. Lena nodded and signed the papers without reading them. When the chaplain asked what she wanted to name the child, Lena looked out the window at the gray sky and said, "Grace." "That's a beautiful name," the chaplain said gently. Lena didn't respond. She just turned her face to the wall and didn't speak for 3 days. The warden, a stern woman named Caldwell who'd run the prison for 15 years, watched Lena carefully after that. Most women broke when their children were taken. They cried, they raged, they bargained. But Lena did none of those things. She simply went silent, moving through her days like a ghost, eating when told, working when assigned, sleeping when the lights went out. "She worries me," Warden Caldwell told her assistant one evening. "The quiet ones are always the dangerous ones." But Lena gave them no trouble. She followed every rule, completed every task, and kept to herself. The other inmates learned quickly not to bother her. There was something in her eyes that warned them off, a coldness that suggested she'd already lost everything that mattered and had nothing left to fear. 6 months into her sentence, Lena received her first visitor who wasn't a lawyer or a prison official. A man named Coleman, who introduced himself as a land agent representing interests in Red Creek territory. They sat across from each other in the visitation room, Lena in her prison dress, Coleman in a tailored suit that looked out of place in the rough frontier prison. "Mrs. Voss," Coleman began, setting a leather folder on the table between them, "I've come to discuss your property." "I'm listening." "Your ranch has been sitting vacant since your husband's death and your incarceration. The territorial government has placed a lien on it for unpaid taxes and debts associated with your criminal conviction. If those debts aren't satisfied within 6 months, the property will be seized and sold at auction." Lena's expression didn't change. "How much?" $1,400. It might as well have been $14,000. Lena had no money, no way to earn any, and no one who owed her favors anymore. The empire she'd built had collapsed the moment she was convicted. "What are you proposing, Mr. Coleman?" He smiled slightly. "I represent a group of investors who are interested in acquiring land in that area. We're prepared to purchase your property for $2,000, enough to clear your debts and leave you with $600 when you're released. And if I refuse? Then the government takes it for nothing, and you walk out of here with nothing." Lena leaned back in her chair, studying him. "Your investors wouldn't happen to include Deputy Marshal Elias Crowe, would they?" Coleman's smile didn't waver. "Marshal Crowe has no involvement in this transaction. But he knows about it." "I couldn't say." Lena looked down at the folder, at the papers inside that would sign away the last piece of what she'd fought for. The ranch had been her fortress, her kingdom, her proof that she could survive anything, and now it was just another thing being taken from her. "I need time to think." "You have 48 hours. After that, the offer expires." When Coleman left, Lena sat alone in the visitation room until a guard came to take her back to her cell. That night, she lay on her cot staring at the ceiling, doing calculations in her head. $600 wasn't enough to start over. It wasn't enough to reclaim anything. But it was better than nothing. She signed the papers 2 days later. The months crawled by with brutal slowness. Lena worked in the prison laundry, her hands raw from lye soap and hot water, her back aching from hauling wet sheets. She kept her head down and her mouth shut. She learned who ran things among the inmates, a hard-faced woman named Dutch, who'd killed her husband with a fireplace poker and commanded respect through sheer meanness. Lena stayed out of Dutch's way and out of everyone else's business, but she was still Lena Voss, and word of who she was had reached the prison long before she arrived. The other women watched her with a mixture of fear and curiosity. Some tried to befriend her, others tried to intimidate her. Lena ignored them all. One afternoon in the yard, a young woman named Annie approached her. Annie was 19, serving 2 years for theft, and she had the kind of desperate optimism that hadn't been beaten out of her yet. "Mrs. Voss, can I ask you something?" Lena looked up from the book she was reading. "What?" "Is it true you ran a whole outlaw operation, that you had men working for you and everything?" "Yes." Annie's eyes widened. "How'd you do it, being a woman and all?" Lena closed her book. "I was smarter than the men around me, that's all. But how do you make them listen? How do you make them respect you?" "You don't make them respect you," Lena said quietly. "You make them need you. Respect comes after." Annie sat down beside her, lowering her voice. "I've been thinking, when I get out, maybe I could—" "Don't," Lena interrupted. "Whatever you're thinking, don't. This life doesn't end well. You're young enough to walk away. Do it." "But you didn't walk away." "No," Lena said, looking past the prison walls toward the distant mountains. "And look where it got me." Elias visited the prison once during Lena's second year. He didn't announce himself. He just showed up one afternoon and asked to see her. Lena was brought to the visitation room in shackles, though she'd never caused any trouble. When she saw Elias sitting there, something flickered across her face. Anger, maybe, or just exhaustion. "Marshal Crowe," she said, sitting down. "Come to gloat?" "No." "Then why are you here?" Elias studied her. She looked thinner, older, the sharpness in her features more pronounced. But her eyes were the same, pale and calculating and unreadable. "I wanted to see how you were doing." Lena laughed, a sound like breaking glass. I'm in prison, Marshal. How do you think I'm doing? Fair enough. They sat in silence for a moment. Then Lena spoke, her voice low and controlled. Did you come to tell me about my daughter? About how she's doing with strangers because you put her mother in here? She's healthy. The Morrisons send reports to the warden. She's walking now, starting to talk. How nice for them. Elias leaned forward. Lena, I didn't come here to fight. I came to tell you that when you get out, you've got a choice. You can go back to what you were, and I'll be waiting. Or you can start over, clean, and I'll leave you alone. Start over with what? You took everything? You took it from yourself. You made choices. They had consequences. Lena's hands clenched on the table. You self-righteous bastard. You stand there with your badge and your laws, acting like you're better than me, but we both know the only difference between us is that your violence is legal. The difference is, I don't prey on innocent people. Neither did I. I took from those who could afford to lose. I protected my own. I survived. You built an empire on fear and theft, and you built a career on putting people in cages. Tell me, Marshal, which of us sleeps better at night? Elias stood. I hope you find some peace in here, Lena, because the person you were before this, she's dead. And the sooner you accept that, the better off you'll be. He walked out without looking back. Lena sat alone in the room, her breathing shallow, her hands shaking with rage she couldn't release. That night, she lay in her cell and made a decision. She would survive this. She would get out. And she would prove to every man who'd ever underestimated her that Lena Voss wasn't finished. The years ground on. Lena earned privileges through good behavior, extra yard time, access to better books, the right to receive letters. She wrote to lawyers about reclaiming custody of Grace when she was released. She wrote to former business contacts, carefully worded letters that didn't explicitly mention criminal activity, but hinted at possibilities. Most didn't write back. Those who did were cautious, non-committal. In her 4th year, she received a letter from a man named Dawson, who owned a freight company that moved goods between territories. She'd done business with him before. He'd transported stolen cattle without asking questions, taking a percentage for his discretion. The letter was brief. He'd heard about her situation. He had a proposition. When she got out, if she wanted work helping manage his routes and negotiate with difficult clients, there was a place for her. Nothing illegal, he assured her. Just business that required someone who knew how to handle complicated situations. Lena read the letter 3 times, then burned it in the stove in the common area. But she remembered every word. With 6 months left on her sentence, Lena was called to the warden's office. Warden Caldwell sat behind her desk, a serious expression on her weathered face. Sit down, Mrs. Voss. Lena sat. I've received a petition from the Morrison family. They're requesting to adopt your daughter legally. Lena's breath caught. No. They've cared for her for 4 years. They've provided for her, raised her. She calls them mother and father. They're asking the court to formalize the arrangement. She's my daughter. She doesn't know you. She won't remember you. Lena's voice hardened. Then I'll make her remember. But she's mine, and I'm getting her back. Warden Caldwell sighed. Mrs. Voss, I have to be honest with you. The court is going to favor stability. A child who's been in one home for 4 years with people who can provide for her versus a mother just released from prison with no home, no income, and a criminal record. What do you think they'll choose? I'll fight it. With what? You can't afford a lawyer. You have no property, no money except what you got from selling your ranch. And that won't last long once you're out. Lena stood, her hands clenched. Are we done? Sit down. I'm not finished. Lena remained standing. Warden Caldwell stood as well, meeting her eyes. I'm telling you this because I've watched you for 4 years, and I know you're smart enough to understand reality. If you want any chance of getting your daughter back, you need to show the court you're stable. That means steady work, a decent place to live, no criminal activity. Can you do that? Yes. I hope so, because if you can't, you'll lose her forever. And I don't think you'd survive that. Lena walked back to her cell with her spine straight and her face composed. But that night, alone in the dark, She allowed herself to feel the full weight of what she was facing. Grace was 4 years old, living with people who loved her and could give her everything Lena couldn't. The courts would see a stable family versus a convicted criminal. The law Elias Crowe served so faithfully would take her daughter just like it had taken everything else, unless she could prove them all wrong. Lena was released on a cold October morning with $623, the clothes on her back, and a letter of reference from Warden Caldwell that said she'd been a model prisoner. She walked out of the prison gates into a world that had kept turning without her, and she didn't look back. She took a stage to Red Creek, watching the familiar landscape roll past the windows. The territory looked the same, but felt different, like returning to a house where someone else lived now. When the stage pulled into town, she stepped down onto the dusty street and felt every eye turn toward her. People recognized her. They stepped aside as she walked past. No one spoke to her. No one welcomed her home. The ranch had been sold, so Lena rented a room above the general store. Small, barely furnished, but clean. She paid for a month in advance and set about rebuilding her life with the same calculation she'd once applied to planning robberies. First, she wrote to Dawson accepting his job offer. He wrote back within a week. The work would require travel between towns, negotiating contracts, managing difficult clients. The pay was modest but steady. She'd start in 3 weeks. Second, she hired a lawyer, the cheapest one she could find who wasn't drunk most of the time. His name was Perkins, and he had an office that smelled like mildew and old coffee. She paid him $50 to file a petition for custody of Grace. "I'll be honest with you, Mrs. Voss," Perkins said, shuffling through papers. "This is going to be difficult. The Morrisons have a strong case. I don't need honesty. I need results. Results require money, court filings, witness testimonies, proving you can support a child. It all costs. How much? Realistically, $300 minimum." Lena did the math in her head. Between rent, food, and legal fees, her money would be gone in 3 months. She needed to work, save, and pray the court moved slowly. Third, she started visiting the Morrison Ranch once a week. They lived 15 miles from Red Creek, a modest property with chickens and a vegetable garden. The first time Lena rode up, Mrs. Morrison came out onto the porch with a shotgun. "I don't want trouble, Mrs. Voss. I'm not here to cause any. I just want to see my daughter. Grace is our daughter. The court hasn't decided that yet." They stood in tense silence. Then Mr. Morrison appeared, a quiet man with kind eyes. He put a hand on his wife's shoulder. "Let her see the child, Martha. She's got a right." Martha lowered the gun reluctantly. 5 minutes. In the yard. I'll be watching." Grace was playing near the chicken coop, a small girl with dark hair and Lena's pale eyes. She looked up when Lena approached, curious but not afraid. "Hello," Lena said, kneeling down. "Hello," Grace said shyly. "Are you a friend of Mama's?" The words hit Lena like a physical blow. Mama, not Lena, not Mother. Mama was the woman standing on the porch with the shotgun. "I'm an old friend," Lena managed. "What are you playing?" "I'm feeding the chickens. Do you want to help?" They spent 5 minutes together, Grace chattering about the chickens and her favorite one named Penny. Lena listened, memorizing every word, every gesture, every detail of the daughter who didn't know her. When Martha called Grace back to the house, the child ran off without looking back. Lena stood in the yard alone, watching her disappear inside. "You should leave her be," Martha said from the porch. "She's happy here. She doesn't need you coming around confusing her. She needs to know who I am." "Why? So you can drag her into whatever life you're building? She's safe here, loved here. You want to take that away?" Lena met her eyes. "I want what's mine." She rode away before Martha could respond, but the woman's words followed her all the way back to Red Creek. Lena started working for Dawson the following month. The job was exactly as he'd described, traveling between towns, managing freight contracts, smoothing over disputes with clients who felt they'd been cheated or shortchanged. It was work that required intelligence, diplomacy, and the ability to read people, all things Lena excelled at. But it also required her to be away from Red Creek for days at a time, which meant fewer visits with Grace and more ammunition for the Morrisons' lawyers. The custody hearing was set for the following spring. Perkins warned her that the judge would want to see stability, steady employment, a permanent residence, character witnesses. Lena had the first two. The third was harder. Who in Red Creek would vouch for her character? Who would stand in court and say Lena Voss deserved to raise a child? She tried asking former business associates. They refused. She tried asking people she'd helped in the past, shopkeepers she'd protected, ranchers she'd negotiated for. They avoided her eyes and made excuses. Finally, she asked Sarah Finch, the maid who'd testified against her. Sarah was working at the hotel now, cleaning rooms and serving meals. When Lena approached her, Sarah's face went pale. "Mrs. Voss, I can't." "I'm not asking you to lie. I'm asking you to tell the truth, that I treated you fairly when you worked for me, that I paid you on time and never hurt you. But I testified against you." "I know, and you were right to. But this isn't about that. This is about my daughter." Sarah's eyes filled with tears. "I'm sorry, I can't. My family would never forgive me. The town would never forgive me." Lena nodded slowly. "I understand." She walked away, adding Sarah to the long list of people who'd chosen safety over courage. The hearing arrived on a gray day in April. Lena wore the best dress she owned, her hair pinned up neatly, her hands steady despite the fear coursing through her. The Morrisons sat on the opposite side of the courtroom with their lawyer, a well-dressed man from Silver Ridge. Grace sat between them, wearing a yellow dress and looking confused. The judge was a man named Holland, older, with white hair and a face carved by years of frontier justice. He listened as the Morrisons' lawyer presented their case. 4 years of care, a stable home, a child who thrived under their guardianship. Then he listened as Perkins presented Lena's case, her right as the biological mother, her rehabilitation, her steady employment. Finally, he asked to hear from Lena herself. She stood, feeling every eye in the room on her. "Mrs. Voss," Judge Holland said, "why should I grant you custody of a child you haven't raised?" "Because she's my daughter. Because I gave birth to her and I love her, and I've spent every day of the last 4 years trying to become someone worthy of raising her." The Morrisons argue that removing her from the only home she's known would be traumatic. "I'm not asking to remove her. I'm asking for the chance to be part of her life, to know her, to let her know me. And if I rule against you?" Lena's voice didn't waver. "Then I'll accept it, but I'll never stop fighting to be in her life." Judge Holland studied her for a long moment. Then he looked at Grace, who was playing with the hem of her dress, oblivious to the decision being made about her future. "I'll issue my ruling in 1 week." That week was the longest of Lena's life. She worked, she waited, she avoided everyone. On the 7th day, she returned to the courthouse. Judge Holland's ruling was brief. He awarded custody to the Morrisons, citing the child's best interests and the stability they could provide. But he granted Lena visitation rights, 1 day per month, supervised until Grace was old enough to decide for herself. It wasn't what Lena wanted, but it was something. She left the courthouse and walked through Red Creek with her head high, even though inside she felt like she was breaking apart. She'd lost the ranch. She'd lost Ronan. And now she'd lost her daughter, too. Everything she'd fought for, everything she'd sacrificed, had been stripped away. But she was still standing, and as long as she was standing, she could still fight. Lena threw herself into work with the kind of intensity that left no room for grief. Dawson's freight business kept her moving between towns, negotiating contracts, settling disputes, and ensuring shipments arrived on time. She was good at it, better than Dawson had expected. Within 6 months, she'd increased his profits by 20% and earned a reputation as someone who could handle the difficult clients no one else wanted to deal with. The money was steady but modest. Lena lived simply, saving every dollar she could. She rented a small house on the edge of Red Creek. Nothing fancy, just 2 rooms and a kitchen with a roof that didn't leak. She bought furniture piece by piece, a table, chairs, a bed frame. She was building something, though she wasn't entirely sure what. Every month, on the second Sunday, she rode out to the Morrison Ranch to see Grace. The visits were strained and formal. Martha Morrison sat on the porch watching like a hawk, while Lena and Grace played in the yard or walked along the fence line. Grace was polite but distant, treating Lena like a kind stranger rather than her mother. "Tell me about school," Lena would say. "It's fine," Grace would answer, her attention on the wildflowers she was picking. What's your favorite subject? Reading, I suppose. The conversations never went deeper than surface pleasantries. Grace would ask about Lena's work sometimes, or comment on the weather, but she never asked the questions that mattered. She never asked why Lena had been gone, why she lived alone, why she only visited once a month. Martha made sure of that. Lena could see the careful way the Morrisons had constructed Grace's understanding of the world. She knew she'd been adopted, knew Lena was her birth mother, but she'd been taught to see the Morrisons as her real family. Lena was just a footnote, a woman who visited sometimes. After one particularly difficult visit where Grace had spent most of the hour asking when she could go back inside, Lena confronted Martha. "You're poisoning her against me." Martha's expression hardened. "I'm doing no such thing. I'm protecting her from confusion and heartache. She's my daughter. She's mine. I've raised her. I've been there for every scraped knee, every nightmare, every milestone. Where were you? I was in prison paying for my mistakes, but I'm here now. For how long? Until the next time you decide the law doesn't apply to you? Until you get yourself killed or locked up again?" Martha stepped closer, her voice low and fierce. "That child deserves stability, love, a future, not a mother who'll disappear the moment things get hard." Lena wanted to argue, to defend herself, but the words caught in her throat, because part of what Martha said was true. Lena had made choices that led to prison, to losing everything, and she couldn't promise it wouldn't happen again. She rode back to Red Creek in silence, the weight of Martha's words pressing down on her like a stone. That winter was brutal. Snow came early and stayed late, turning the territory into a frozen wasteland. Freight shipments slowed to a crawl. Dawson had to lay off some of his workers, though he kept Lena on because she was the only one who could sweet-talk creditors into extending payment deadlines. Money got tight. Lena started taking on side work, bookkeeping for local businesses, helping ranchers negotiate sales. It was all legal, all above board, but it reminded her uncomfortably of the old days when she'd managed Ronan's operation. The same skills that had made her a successful criminal made her a successful businesswoman. The only difference was the law. One evening, a man named Carter approached her at the saloon, where she sometimes ate dinner. He was a cattle broker she'd met through Dawson, a smooth-talking man with expensive boots and a gold watch chain. "Mrs. Voss, mind if I join you?" Lena gestured to the empty chair across from her. Carter sat, ordering whiskey from the bartender. "I've been hearing good things about your work. Dawson says you're the best negotiator he's ever had." Dawson's generous with his praise. "I don't think he is. I think you're exactly as good as he says." Carter leaned forward. "I have a proposition for you. There's a land deal happening north of here. Some investors are buying up property for a railroad expansion. They're low-balling the current owners, trying to scare them into selling cheap. I think you could help those ranchers get a fair price. What's your interest in this?" "I take a percentage of any improved sale price. You'd get 20% of my cut. Could be several $100s if you play it right." Lena studied him. "And if the investors don't want to negotiate?" "Then you convince them. That's what you do, isn't it? Convince difficult people to see reason?" It was legitimate work, legal work. But something about it felt familiar in a way that made Lena uneasy. Carter was asking her to use the same skills she'd once used to intimidate and manipulate. The only difference was the veneer of respectability. "I'll think about it." "Don't think too long. Opportunity doesn't wait." After Carter left, Lena sat alone with her untouched meal, staring at her reflection in the dark window. She'd promised herself she'd go straight, that she'd build a life that could withstand scrutiny from courts and lawmen and people like Martha Morrison. But going straight was harder than she'd imagined. The world still rewarded the same ruthlessness, just dressed up in fancier clothes. She took the job. Over the next 3 months, she met with the ranchers facing pressure to sell, reviewed the investors' offers, and negotiated better terms. She was firm but fair, using logic and leverage rather than threats. When it was done, the ranchers got fair prices, Carter got his percentage, and Lena walked away with $400. It should have felt like a victory. Instead, it felt like walking a tightrope over a canyon, one misstep away from falling back into the person she'd been. Elias heard about Lena's work through the usual channels: rumors in saloons, gossip among merchants, reports from deputies who kept an eye on anyone with a criminal past. He'd been reassigned to a different territory after Ronan's death, but he still made it back to Red Creek every few months to check in. He found Lena at her house one afternoon, carrying firewood from the shed. She saw him coming and set the wood down, waiting. "Marshal Crowe, what brings you to my doorstep?" "Just checking in, making sure you're staying out of trouble. I'm running freight contracts and negotiating land deals. All legal, all documented. You can check the records if you don't believe me." "I already did." Lena smiled without warmth. "Of course you did." Elias looked at the modest house, the neat yard, the carefully maintained appearance of respectability. "You're doing better than I expected." "Did you expect me to fail?" "I expected you to try. Failure or success was up to you." They stood in uncomfortable silence. Then Lena spoke, her voice quieter. "I see Grace once a month, supervised visits. She barely knows me. The Morrisons won the custody fight." "I heard." "I'm sorry." "Are you? Or are you relieved that the criminal's daughter is being raised by decent people?" Elias met her eyes. "I'm sorry because I know what it's like to lose something you can't get back. I don't wish that on anyone, even you." Lena looked away, blinking against sudden tears she refused to shed in front of him. "Was there anything else, Marshal?" "No. Just wanted to make sure you were all right." He turned to leave, then paused. "For what it's worth, Lena, I think you're doing the right thing. Building something legitimate. It takes more strength than you probably realize." "It doesn't feel like strength. It feels like slowly drowning." "That's what staying afloat feels like sometimes." He left her standing in her yard, and Lena wondered if that was the closest thing to kindness Elias Crowe would ever offer her. 2 years passed. Grace turned 7, growing taller and more confident, her resemblance to Lena becoming more pronounced. The monthly visits continued, though they remained strained. Grace was never cruel, just indifferent, as if Lena was an obligation she'd learned to tolerate. Lena kept working, kept saving, kept building the life she hoped might one day be enough to convince Grace she was worth knowing. She bought better furniture, nicer clothes, saved money in a bank account she planned to give to Grace when she was older. But the town never fully accepted her. People were polite but distant. They did business with her because she was good at what she did, but they didn't invite her to their homes or their gatherings. She existed on the margins of Red Creek society, useful but not welcome. Then everything began to unravel. It started with Wade Brennan's release from prison. He'd served 7 years for the crimes he'd committed under Lena's direction, and he came out harder and angrier than when he went in. Curtis had died in prison 3 years earlier, knifed in a fight over a card game, and Wade blamed Lena for all of it. He arrived in Red Creek on a cold Tuesday morning, walked into the saloon, and started asking questions about where Lena Voss lived. The bartender, who'd known Lena for years now and had developed a grudging respect for her, sent word. Lena received the message while she was working at Dawson's office and felt ice settle in her stomach. She went to find Elias, who happened to be in town that week. She found him at the marshal's office going through reports with the current marshal, a young man named Pike, who'd taken over after Tom Birch's death. "I need to talk to you," Lena said from the doorway. Elias looked up, saw her face, and stood. "What's wrong?" "Wade Brennan's out. He's looking for me." Pike frowned. "Brennan? Wasn't he one of your old crew?" "He was, and he blames me for his brother's death and his own imprisonment." Elias grabbed his coat. "Where's he now?" "Saloon, last I heard." They found Wade there, drinking whiskey and cleaning his pistol at a corner table. He looked up when Elias and Pike walked in, and his expression turned ugly. "Deputy Marshal Crowe. Still putting innocent people behind bars. Wade Brennan. Heard you were back. Just got out. Figured I'd visit old friends." His eyes shifted to the doorway where Lena had appeared. "Hello, Mrs. Voss. Been a long time." Lena stayed by the door, her hand near the small pistol she'd started carrying after Wade's release was announced. "I heard you were asking about me. Just wondering where you ended up. Heard you're doing real well for yourself. Nice house, respectable job. Funny how things work out." "What do you want, Wade?" "Want? I want my life back. I want my brother back. But since I can't have those, I guess I'll settle for making sure you don't get to keep pretending you're something you're not." Elias stepped forward. "That sounds like a threat." It's a statement of fact. She's a criminal, always has been, and sooner or later everyone's going to see it. Your brother testified against her. He made his choices. Wade stood, holstering his pistol. And now I'm making mine. See you around, Mrs. Voss. He walked out, and the saloon remained silent until the door swung shut behind him. Lena looked at Elias. He's going to kill me. Not if I can help it. Pike, I want someone watching Wade Brennan at all times. If he so much as looks at Mrs. Voss wrong, I want to know about it. Pike nodded, already heading for the door to organize deputies. Elias turned to Lena. Stay visible. Stay in public places. Don't give him an opportunity. And what happens when he creates one anyway? Then we deal with it. But dealing with it proved harder than Elias anticipated. Wade was careful. He didn't threaten Lena directly. He didn't break any laws. He just existed in Red Creek like a storm cloud waiting to break, his presence a constant reminder that the past wasn't finished with her yet. He started spreading rumors, reminding people of who Lena used to be, what she'd done, how many people had suffered because of her decisions. He told stories in the saloon about the old days, painting himself and Curtis as victims of Lena's manipulation. Some people believed him. Others just enjoyed having fresh gossip. Lena felt the town's attitude toward her shift. Shopkeepers who'd been cordial became cold. Business contacts made excuses to work with someone else. Even Dawson started acting uncomfortable around her, though he didn't fire her. The worst part was Grace. The Morrisons heard the rumors and decided to suspend Lena's visitation rights temporarily, citing concerns for Grace's emotional well-being. Lena tried to fight it, but her lawyer, she'd had to hire a new one after Perkins drank himself to death, told her she didn't have grounds to challenge it. They're allowed to make decisions in the child's best interest, the lawyer explained. And with Wade Brennan making threats, they can argue it's not safe. He's not threatening Grace, he's threatening me. Same thing in the court's eyes. You want those visits back, you need to resolve the situation with Brennan. But how? Wade wasn't doing anything actionable. He was just destroying her reputation piece by piece, taking away everything she'd worked to build. One night, Lena was walking home from Dawson's office when Wade stepped out of an alley ahead of her. She stopped, her hand moving to her pistol. Relax, Wade said, holding up his hands. Just want to talk. We have nothing to talk about. I think we do. See, I've been thinking about Curtis, about how he was weak, how he broke under pressure. But that wasn't really his fault, was it? You taught him to be that way. You taught all of us to follow orders and not think for ourselves. I gave you work. I paid you. You made your own choices. Did we? Or were we just tools you used until we weren't useful anymore? He took a step closer. You know what I realized in prison? You're the reason my life fell apart. Not the law. Not bad luck. You. And you're walking around like you deserve a second chance. I served my time. Time doesn't pay back what you took, but I can make sure you lose everything else. Lena drew her pistol. Stay away from me, Wade. He smiled. Or what? You gonna shoot me? That'll prove everyone right about you, won't it? That you're still the same cold-blooded criminal you always were. I'll do what I have to do to protect myself. Good. So will I. He walked away, leaving Lena standing in the empty street with her gun drawn and her heart pounding. She reported the encounter to Elias and Pike, but there was nothing they could do. Wade hadn't threatened her directly. He hadn't touched her. It was just words. He's baiting you, Elias said. Trying to get you to do something stupid. I know what he's doing. Then don't give him what he wants. Stay calm. Stay legal. But staying calm was getting harder. Wade's campaign against her intensified. He started showing up at places where she worked, standing across the street, just watching. He spread stories about her daughter, suggesting that Grace was better off without a mother like Lena. The breaking point came when Lena discovered someone had broken into her house and destroyed everything she owned. Furniture smashed, clothes torn. Even the small box of letters and mementos she'd saved from Grace's infancy burned in the fireplace. Wade's handiwork, she was certain, though he had a perfect alibi. He'd been playing cards at the saloon all night with a dozen witnesses. Lena stood in the ruins of her home, surrounded by broken pieces of the life she'd tried to build, and felt something inside her crack. She'd fought so hard to be legitimate, to be respectable, to prove she could change. And none of it mattered. Wade was going to destroy her anyway, and the law couldn't stop him. She loaded her pistol and went looking for him. She found him behind the saloon, alone, smoking a cigarette in the moonlight. He saw her coming and smiled. "Wondered when you'd show up." Lena raised the gun. "You've taken everything from me. What more do you want?" "I want you to know what it feels like to lose everything and have nobody care. I want you to suffer the way Curtis suffered, the way I suffered. Curtis made his own choices, so did you. And now I'm making another one." Wade's hand moved toward his gun. A shot rang out, not from Lena's gun, but from the shadows beside the building. Wade crumpled, a bullet in his chest. Lena spun, her pistol still raised, and saw Elias step into the light, his revolver smoking. "He drew first," Elias said calmly. "I saw it. Self-defense." Wade was gasping on the ground, blood spreading across his shirt. He looked up at Lena, his eyes filled with hate and pain. "You still win," he whispered. Then he stopped moving. Elias holstered his gun and looked at Lena. "You all right?" Lena lowered her pistol, her hands shaking. "You killed him. He was going for his gun. He would have killed you." "Why did you do it? Why did you save me?" Elias was quiet for a moment. "Because you were trying, really trying, and I wasn't going to let someone like Wade Brennan take that away from you." Pike arrived with deputies moments later. They took statements, examined Wade's body, confirmed Elias's account. It was ruled a justified shooting. Wade Brennan was buried the next day in an unmarked grave, but the damage was done. Lena's reputation in Red Creek was destroyed beyond repair. Even with Wade gone, people still whispered about her. The Morrisons refused to reinstate her visitation rights, citing the violence that seemed to follow her everywhere. Lena met with her lawyer one last time. "I want to sign over all parental rights to the Morrisons. Make it legal, permanent." The lawyer looked surprised. "Are you sure? You fought so hard." "I'm sure. Grace deserves a life without this shadow hanging over her, without people whispering about her criminal mother. The Morrisons can give her that. I can't." "What will you do?" "I don't know yet, but it won't be here." The papers were signed within a week. Lena wrote one final letter to Grace, to be given to her when she turned 18. In it, she explained everything: who she'd been, what she'd done, why she'd made the choices she made. She told Grace about Ronan, about the ranch, about the empire they'd built and lost. She told her about prison, about trying to rebuild, about failing despite her best efforts. And she told Grace she loved her, had always loved her, and that giving her up was the hardest thing she'd ever done. She sealed the letter and gave it to the Morrisons with instructions not to open it. Martha Morrison took it with a mixture of relief and something that might have been pity. "Where will you go?" Martha asked. "West, maybe California, somewhere I can start over where nobody knows my name." "I hope you find peace, Mrs. Voss." "So do I." Lena packed what little she had left and prepared to leave Red Creek forever. But before she could go, she had one last piece of business. She was walking to the stage depot on a gray morning when a figure stepped out from between two buildings. For a moment, Lena thought it was another ghost from her past. But this man was a stranger, young, maybe 25, with crossed eyes and a pistol already drawn. "Lena Voss?" She stopped. "Who's asking?" "Doesn't matter. You killed my uncle. Now I'm settling accounts." Lena didn't recognize him, didn't know which of the many men she'd wronged might have been his uncle. It didn't matter. This was how it ended for people like her. Not in courtrooms or prison cells, but in dusty streets with strangers seeking vengeance for old wounds. She thought about drawing her own gun, thought about fighting, but she was so tired of fighting. "Do what you came to do," she said quietly. The young man's expression flickered with uncertainty. "Aren't you going to try to stop me?" "What's the point? You're going to shoot me anyway. Might as well get it over with." He hesitated, the gun wavering slightly. And in that moment of hesitation, Lena saw what she should have seen all along. He was just another wounded person carrying pain they didn't know how to release, looking for someone to blame. "I'm sorry," she said. "Whatever I did to your uncle, whatever part I played in hurting your family, I'm sorry. I can't undo it. I can't make it right. All I can do is tell you that revenge won't heal what's broken inside you. It'll just make you into someone like me, and you don't want to be someone like me." The gun lowered slightly. "You think saying sorry makes it better?" "No, nothing makes it better. But killing me won't either. You'll still hurt just as much tomorrow." He stared at her, tears forming in his eyes. "I promised myself I'd make you pay." "Then do it, but know that it won't change anything. The dead stay dead. The hurt stays hurt. All you'll have is another body on your conscience." The young man's hand was shaking now. He looked at Lena, at his gun, at the empty street around them. Then he lowered the weapon completely. "I can't do it." "Then don't." He holstered the pistol and backed away, his face a mask of confusion and grief. "I don't know what else to do." "Neither do I," Lena said softly. "But killing each other isn't it." He turned and ran, disappearing into an alley. Lena stood alone in the street, realizing how close she'd come to dying. Her legs felt weak. She sat down on the edge of the boardwalk, her hands trembling. But she'd survived. Again, always surviving. Elias found her there 20 minutes later. He'd heard there was a confrontation, had come running. "What happened?" "Someone wanted revenge, changed his mind." "You talk him down?" "Something like that." Elias sat beside her. "You're leaving." "Today. Taking the noon stage west." "Where to?" "Does it matter?" They sat in silence. Then Elias spoke, his voice quiet. "For what it's worth, Lena, I think you tried harder than most people would have. This territory, it doesn't forgive. It doesn't forget. Maybe somewhere else, you'll find what you're looking for." "I'm not looking for anything anymore. I'm just trying to stop running." "That's the hardest part. Stopping long enough to let the past catch up and then leaving it behind anyway." Lena stood, brushing dust from her skirt. "Goodbye, Marshal Crowe. Goodbye, Mrs. Voss." She walked to the depot and boarded the stage. As it pulled away from Red Creek, she looked back once at the town that had been her kingdom, her prison, and finally her graveyard for dreams. Then she turned her face forward and didn't look back again. 3 months later, a letter arrived at the Red Creek Marshal's office. It was addressed to Elias Crowe. Inside was a brief note in familiar handwriting. "Marshal, I made it to San Francisco. Working for a shipping company, legal, quiet. Nobody knows me here. Thought you'd want to know I'm still trying. Maybe that counts for something. LV." Elias kept the letter in his desk drawer, though he never wrote back. Some stories ended without resolution, without redemption, without the neat closure people wanted. Lena Voss was one of those stories. A woman too smart for her own good, too ruthless to be forgiven, but too stubborn to stop trying. Years later, when Grace Morrison turned 18 and opened the sealed letter her birth mother had written, she read it alone in her room with tears streaming down her face. The letter told her everything. The truth without excuses, the mistakes without justification, the love without demanding anything in return. Grace never tried to find Lena, but she kept the letter. And sometimes when life got hard, she'd take it out and read it again, wondering about the complicated, dangerous, brilliant woman who'd given her life and then given her up. Lena Voss died in San Francisco in 1891, struck down not by lawmen or vengeful enemies, but by a random bullet from a bar fight she had nothing to do with. She was 43 years old. The newspaper obituary identified her as a shipping clerk with no known family. They buried her in a pauper's grave with a numbered marker. Back in Red Creek territory, which had grown into a proper town with electric lights and paved streets, old-timers still told stories about the outlaw couple who'd terrorized the region decades earlier. They talked about Ronan Voss's violence and Lena Voss's cunning. They talked about the deputy marshal who'd brought them down and the justice that had finally caught up with them. But what they remembered most was the paradox of Lena herself, a woman who'd been both victim and villain, both brilliant and broken, who'd fought harder than most men and lost everything anyway. Some said she got what she deserved. Others said the frontier had chewed her up like it did everyone who tried to tame it. Elias Crowe, retired and living quietly in Denver, heard about Lena's death through official channels. He sat in his study that evening, looking at the old wanted poster he'd kept as a souvenir of his career. Lena's face stared back at him, young and defiant and certain she could beat the odds. She'd been wrong, but she'd never stopped fighting. And in the hard mathematics of the frontier, maybe that was its own kind of victory. He folded the poster and put it away, adding it to the collection of cases that had defined his life. Red Creek territory had changed. The lawless days were over. Order had won. But late at night, when Elias couldn't sleep, he sometimes wondered if order and justice were the same thing. And he thought about Lena Voss, the outlaw's wife, who'd been smarter than everyone around her and still couldn't escape the life she'd chosen. In the end, the frontier took them all. The violent and the clever, the lawmen and the outlaws. The only difference was which side of history remembered your name.